When we talk about for loops, this form of iterations allows us to initialize multiple variables, to set multiple conditions, and to execute multiple post-process. Let's now see practical example of that. For start, we will create two new variables, result and limit, with values 0 and 100. Inside of our for loop, we want to initialize three new variables. We can do that like this. In first group, we created three new variables, first, second, and third, and their values are 0, 0, 1. For our condition, we will check if our first variable is less or equal than our limit variable. In post-process, we will update three different variables, like this. We want, before we start next iteration, to update our first, second, and third variables. So, new updated value of our first variable will be previous value of our first variable plus 1. Second variable will now have value when we sum value of first and value of second variable. Third value will have new value when we sum first and third value. In our block, we will define code like this. If value of first variable is equal with value of our limit variable, then new value of our result variable will be sum of our first, second, and third variable. Now let's see one important thing. If we try to print values of our first, second, and third variable, we will get an error because these variables exist only inside of our for loop, which means that when we go outside of our for loop, these variables will be undefined objects. Only one variable which we can print, and that variable exists outside of our for loop, is variable result. When we print result variable, we will get output. Let's now set value 5 to our limit variable and create one another for loop. In our second for loop, for start, we created two new variables, first and second variable with values 0 and 10. Now we have multiple conditions. On each iteration, we will check if variable first is less or equal than value of variable limit, and also we will check if value of second variable is less than 500. After that, in our post process, we will update value of our first variable, and also we will update value of our second variable. Then we will enter into our block. On each iteration, we will print values of our first and second variables, and we want to get result only in the case where value of first variable is equal with value of our limit variable. So now, in this case, when we print our result variable, our value will be 377. Let's now see how we can write our for loop inside of another for loop. We created new for loop where we initialize our new f variable. Our condition is that f must be less or equal than 3, and in our post process we increase our f variable by 1. Let's write new for loop inside of our existing loop. We have second for loop. When we initialize our m variable, our condition checks if our m variable is less or equal than 3, and on each iteration we will increase value of our m variable by 1. In final picture, what we have here, our first loop will start, and that is first iteration of our first for loop. Then inside of that loop we create first cycle. In that first cycle we will have 3 iterations inside of our second loop, which means that one iteration for first for loop will create 3 new iterations of our second for loop. When we print our output, picture will look like this. We can see that our cycle 1 is iterating 3 times because our second for loop has 3 iterations. After we finish iterations in our second for loop, we will start second cycle of our first for loop. As you can see, in the second group we have value of b in cycle 2 is 1. Then again we execute 3 new iterations inside of our second for loop. After that we start third cycle, and that will be the last cycle because that is the last iteration of our first for loop. So last output which we will get will be that value of b in cycle 3 is 3. Now we understood how we can operate with for loop inside of another for loop. In the next video we will see how we can create iterations over our slice and map.